My name is Craig Hassard and I'm a Senior Lecturer at Monash University in the Department of General Practice. Also do a lot of work with groups outside of Monash as well, a lot of in the area of teaching mindfulness.
So Craig, could you tell us a little bit about what mindfulness is?
Well, mindfulness is all about paying attention and being present. And so mindfulness is both a formal meditation practice where you sit in a chair and you practice paying attention and being present, but it's also a way of living, because there's no point in being mindful in a chair for 5 or 10 minutes at the start of a day and then getting out of the chair and being unmindful for the rest of the day. So mindfulness in its fullness is both a formal practice in meditation, but it's an informal practice in living with awareness, living in the present moment, living with intention and openness in our day-to-day life.
So Craig, what are the consequences of not being mindful?
Well, being unmindful, not paying attention in our day-to-day life really has a lot of effects, many of which we don't really sort of think of or notice. So firstly, when we're not paying attention, driving the car, distracted by the kids or something else happening in the car, or multitasking, then we're more likely to have accidents. Or when we're not mindful while communicating, we don't really take in what the person's talking about. We don't really communicate with any depth. Or if we're not mindful while we're studying or reading something, we waste our time and it takes longer and our memory doesn't work very well. So summing all of that up, when we're unmindful, we're a lot less efficient and effective and use our time a lot less well. But there's also other effects, because when we're not mindful, we need to ask the question, well, what is our attention going to? So very often when distracted, our mind's wandering off to negative self-talk and worry and anticipation and how am I going to fit all of this into my busy day, or going back over the past, why did I do this, or if only I hadn't done that. So this tendency to worry about the future, this tendency to get caught up in negative self-talk or reliving the past can produce an enormous amount of stress and pressure. So mental health problems are also associated with being unmindful, so depression and anxiety for that very reason. But it also has effects on our physical health. So when we are worried and stressed and anxious and distracted, that is unmindful, then the effects on our body are all the way from the stress response, so tension and heart rate and blood pressure, and affects our cholesterol, but it also affects our brain and how it functions. It affects our immunity. Our immune system doesn't work so well. So it can make us more likely to get ill, but it even has effects right down to the way our DNA expresses itself. So when we're more unmindful and stressed and anxious and distracted, our DNA is even aging at a faster rate as well. So the implications for mental and physical health, but also how we function and perform and communicate and relate in day-to-day life, are all affected in a very negative way.
So is the practice of mindfulness something that a psychologist needs to teach, or someone like you, or can people learn it from a book?
There are a lot of different ways of learning mindfulness. So we can read a book or get some CDs and listen to some practices. So we can, in a self-directed kind of way, we can learn a fair bit about mindfulness ourselves. I think if we've got the option, it's much better to learn mindfulness, say, within a group, and to do a course from a well-trained mindfulness practitioner, because then we'll learn a lot more than we might pick up from a book. And when we're having difficulties or we've got questions, we can ask somebody about them and find a way of working with them. But also when learning in a group, if we can do a course, then you learn also from the people in the course who are doing the group. So there's a lot of different ways of learning mindfulness, but I think learning from a well-trained mindfulness teacher, oftentimes might be a psychologist, but there are a lot of other health professionals who have training in mindfulness as well. Quite a number of doctors and psychiatrists are learning it now too, and there are a lot of people who within yoga traditions and so on have been teaching these kinds of things, and within the Buddhist tradition, if somebody's interested in something with a more spiritual or philosophical dimension to it. So there's a lot of different avenues to learn mindfulness.
There's so much more written about mindfulness now in the media. Is there research to support its practice?
The amount of research on mindfulness practices and its effects on well-being have gone up exponentially, particularly in the last 10 years. Since some of the research started to come out about preventing the relapse of depression, so all the mental health benefits, that was a catalyst more than anything else for the wider interest in mindfulness. So it's not just about depression and anxiety and dealing with stress, it's also research on the physical health benefits, so better immunity, less coughs and colds and recovering quicker from them, effects on brain function and structure. So it literally changes the anatomy and the way the brain functions. And so we now understand the brain in a very different way to how we did 10 or 20 years ago. So it slows down the aging of the brain, helps to preserve brain cells and maybe even generate new brain cells in important areas of grey matter, which I think as we all age is a more and more attractive option to us. But better performance, better memory. So a lot of elite athletes now train their minds as much as they train their bodies, because focus is very important for being able to function well under pressure. So there's a whole range, and even studies right down to, I mentioned about stress aging our DNA faster. There's been research now, particularly looking at women who are caregivers, that the effects are on the DNA that actually slows down the rate of aging of DNA and improves the DNA repair. So the signpost is pointing in a very interesting direction, but I guess it's just affirming what has probably been known for a long time, that the mind-body relationship's a very deep one.
So Craig, what about the use of mindfulness in people with chronic illness or chronic conditions?
Yes, there's certainly been a lot of work looking at how people cope with chronic illnesses and the outcomes for those illnesses too. Probably more research on cancer than perhaps other conditions, but studies on MS and a wide variety of other conditions as well. So it tends to show that people cope better with the illness, so the stress or the pressure of having a potentially a life-threatening or debilitating illness. But also it seems to show that people cope with the symptoms better. So if it's pain or nausea or disability that a person's coping with, people cope better and find more meaning in their life if they're given mindfulness as a way of helping them to cope. And some studies suggest that it may actually help to produce better outcomes as well, which is very interesting, but it's early days in terms of that research.
So more research to be done?
Oh, absolutely. The more research that's done, the more that we find. I think it's it's like a gold mine where I just sort of found the first vein, if you like, of gold, but I think that vein will go very deep.
So Craig, how can people start to introduce mindfulness into their daily life?
Well, what we said before about certainly doing a course or getting a good book and so on, but the first ways that a person applies mindfulness is firstly doing a formal mindfulness meditation practice is a great way to really get the process going. And we don't have to sit in a chair practicing mindfulness meditation for too long to realise that most of the time when we're trying to pay attention, our mind's all over the place. So learning to notice, not to judge or react to the fact that the mind gets distracted, to be more accepting and open, to notice when the attention goes off, to gently bring it back. So in mindfulness meditation practice, that would be to the body or the breathing, for example. So learning to practice that for 5 or 10 minutes, maybe say twice a day before our working day, so early in the day and maybe early in the evening, between our working day, say, and our evening. Would be good sort of time for the formal practice of mindfulness meditation. And then the informal practice of mindfulness is to be present and attentive as we go about our day-to-day life. So we might be doing a job at work, but the mind's sort of in the background, distracted by the 100 things I've still got to do. So just to notice the distraction, but to just gently unhook the attention from that and just do the one thing at this moment that's in front of us now. Yes, there will be all of these other things to do, but just come back to the one thing at a time. Worrying about how something's going to turn out in the future and living the event before it's even happened, causing ourselves stress, to notice, well, the event will happen when it will. Just come back to the here and the now, prepare for that event, which is very different to worrying about it. Reliving the past, come back to the present moment. So moment by moment, to be attentive, to be present, is a way of being mindful in day-to-day life. Acceptance and attitude's a very important part of mindfulness. So just because we're practicing mindfulness doesn't mean that we're not going to experience unpleasant physical sensations or sometimes uncomfortable thoughts or worries or emotions, but learning to be less reactive to them, less judgmental about them, being able to notice them without getting necessarily preoccupied about them helps those thoughts and feelings and experiences and emotions to create less disturbance on the way through. So it's about attitude as well as about paying attention. So that's some of the cognitive aspects of mindfulness. To explore that in more detail is something we don't necessarily have a chance to do today, but mindfulness is certainly a lot more than just sitting in a chair and just doing some mindfulness meditation. For example, sitting on a train or whatever, just be present to the journey, just noticing the environment. Because very often we're sitting on a train and worrying. How much have I got to do today? Will I get through it all? Stepping into the shower, instead of just having a shower, it's the shower plus worry. So driving the car rather than just driving from point A to point B, where it's driving and worrying. So very often what the mind's distracted by is all the internal churning and activity that really doesn't serve any useful purpose. And unfortunately, when the mind's in that mode all the time, it's called default mode, it's a distracted state, but when the mind's in that state all the time, we do actually find it hard to focus our attention effectively on the things that we do need to do.